Hello and welcome everyone to the Westchester State of K-12 State of K-12 Education in 2021 webinar. I have with me three panelists today. We're going to explore what the education industry looks like in the schools, what it looks like from a funding standpoint, and what it looks like from an industry perspective. So I have with me Denise Cobb-Williams. She's the Director of Elementary Curriculum at Walton County School District in Monroe, Georgia. I have Victoria Akosile, who is the Manager of Ed Policy at the Software and Information Industry Association, and then Kathy Mickey, who is the Managing Editor and Senior Educational Analyst at SIMBA Information. So I'm going to start off first with Denise. She's got a PowerPoint. She's going to talk through a bit about what she's seeing in her district. So Denise, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. First, starting off, I just want to give a little background about my district to try to paint a picture so you can kind of understand Walton County and our needs and how we came up with a plan when we were faced with COVID, like the rest of the nation, to provide the best learning opportunities for our students in our district. So a little bit about who we are here in Walton. Our student enrollment population, we're right under 14,000 students. We are almost half and half, about 48% female, 52% male. That third line is crucial, and I'll talk a lot about that. For digital learning right now, we're at 13% in our district, and for in-person learning, we are at 87% of our students who are participating in person. And when the pandemic started, or when we came back to school in June, and we've been in school since August, our curriculum team was very busy, really working with our school leaders. We put out multiple surveys to our school community to ask what are the options? What do you want our district to provide? And we wanted to make sure we were very cognizant of the needs and the requests of our parents. And as you can see there, the majority of our parents wanted in-person learning, and that is exactly what we have provided. We've been in school since August the 4th. We have not had any delays or any shutdowns. But again, we do have about 13% of our kids who are in distance learning. We're actually having an award ceremony for all of our K through first grade distance learners in just a minute. We'll have an award ceremony for them because they've been distanced the entire time. In our district, we have 9 elementary schools, we have 3 middle schools, and 3 feeder high schools, and we're kind of set up as clusters. So you have 3 elementary schools that feed into a middle school, and that 1 middle school feeds into the high school. Our student demographics, we're about 62% Caucasian, 23% Black, 10% Hispanic, about 2% Asian, and about 4% other. You can see our breakdown as far as with our gifted learners, special education, and our ESOL. And our ESOL population is picking up some, and I'll kind of speak about equity when we get to the next slide as far as us providing our delivery models for distance learning. Our support staff, we have roughly maybe over 1,100 employees, a little over 900 teachers, and you can see the average experience there, or years of experience in advanced degrees. I have to tip my hat at our graduation rate. We have really worked on this as a district, and that is the highest graduation rate for our district at 91.8%. We are a PBIS district, so we are all about a positive culture, and I also put the star ratings for climates with our schools. A big piece, especially with the CARES funding and the AARP funding, as far as our budget there, I just wanted you to get a general idea of the amount of money that we are generating here, dealing with education, and then our per pupil expenditure. A huge one for us, even with COVID, we're basically at a one-to-one digital initiative, and that has helped. But I will be honest, we have had some limitations because in our district, we're about 45 miles from Atlanta, Georgia, but we have some suburban areas, and we also have some rural areas where there are some limitations with just the internet in general, and we've had to provide hotspots and do some other things to help families during this time. So how did we adapt for schools? Basically, and I'll be honest, that first piece, that equity piece, it hit us in the face. Looking at the curriculum itself, I think in March, we were really looking at crisis learning. And so we were learning as we were trying to provide learning opportunities for students as we were closing down the school year. But during the summer is when we really kicked in high gear, when our superintendent sent out the surveys and our families said the majority wanted to come in person. So then we're faced with the challenge of having in-person learning and distance learning, but trying to make sure. And then we had the conversation like, okay, are we going to ask teachers to teach students in person and to also teach students who are on a digital platform? And we did not make that decision as a district. What we did, basically, when we looked at the numbers, and I'll speak right now towards elementary, we had about 1,400 families out of that under 14,000 that decided, hey, we really do want a distance option. So from those 9 elementary schools, I met with the principals, and then we just started to comb through that information and that data to see, like, from I guess school A, which would be 8th Road, how many students. They had roughly like 150 students who weren't returning. And so then once we looked at the data from all of the schools to determine we would start with 1,400 kids for an elementary distance learning school, then we actually pulled teachers. And so I became the principal of that elementary school, working with those 42 plus teachers to provide distance learning for our families. But I'll be honest, again, there are some families we've had to print packets. In some of the rural areas where the internet is not the best, we had to print packets, and we had packets available at all of the schools and also outside of our Board of Education. We also use our social workers to actually do home visits and to actually deliver the packets where there were some limitations with transportation. And really in March, we saw with equity, the K-2 to 2nd grade, when you have a middle school and high school student, 9 times out of 10, they can navigate through some of those digital platforms. But our pre-K through 2nd grade parents, we were having to understand that they were stepping in the role of being a learning coach for their kids. So there was a lot of monitoring, and we had to make sure this summer that we educated our parents so they could provide that necessary support with being the facilitator and standing in the gap, even though we had a dedicated teacher for those distance learning students. And also this summer, our efforts are, they're kicked into overdrive. We have summer camps that are provided. We have a reading summer camp that will be about 3 weeks, where we have sent invitations for all of our elementary school students, and we're inviting everyone. All rising 1st through 4th graders are invited to participate, and it's a fun camp-like atmosphere, but basically the focus is on reading. I know with a lot of the research is showing that schools took a dive in math, but we just looked at our MAP data today, and it's startling, the literacy drop that we've had for reading and language arts. Our math still seems to be an area of strength, and it always has been in our district, but the reading drop off is one that we are really having to focus on. And so literacy will be our top goal next year as a district. We also have summer school efforts for middle school, high school. We have ramped up our tutoring services and providing small group tutoring. We're doing that now. We will continue to do that through all of next year. We have an early intervention teacher. We have provided additional early intervention teachers, especially in that K-2 area, to help students in the area of reading for next year. So truly equity, because we realized that, yes, we were suddenly forced into the opportunity, but making sure that we are truly differentiating, providing the needs, providing the supports for our students' needs. That staff and professional development has been key. For us, you know, in high school, kids kind of get to choose a career pathway. Now we're seeing that our staff members are getting to really choose a professional learning development pathway. It's tailored for their individual needs, whether it be e-courses, webinars. The platform that we use as far as providing instruction for our kids, we paid for a Zoom license for a district. And so that is the platform that we use. Our learning management system is Schoology, and we have been using that for a while, but we did go back this summer to develop a checklist with teachers for them to spell out specifically what needed to be on those Schoology pages. And also another thing that was crucial for us, all teachers, even the in-person teachers, your platform or your page had to be current, because at any time we may have to quarantine. There may be an interruption in learning, and we've had lots of those. I'll be honest, even one of our high schools, it was a point where everybody in the front office had to be quarantined. And so myself, the assistant superintendent, the director for middle school, high school, we all went over to be their front office staff because they didn't have anybody. And it was the point of, okay, are we going to close the school down, or are we going to remain in school, and then we'll have a makeshift staff? And that's what we've done. We've had to do things like that also in the area of the cafeteria. We've had to be creative with maintenance workers going over to help in the area of the cafe. Really, and my last slide says better together. We have learned as a district how to make true lemonade from lemons that we were given with COVID, which I know everybody else is doing the same thing. The impacts of remote learning versus the hybrid learning model. Just really wanted to highlight again, in last March, it was crisis learning. I think we've learned so much. Myself as a parent, my kid has been a distance learner this entire year through our district, and she has excelled. And I really think that because of the work we have put in with the professional learning, with our teachers, the support we have provided them, with social emotional support, and we provided social emotional support not only for learners, we've also had to provide that for our staffs. We had teachers that were worried about coming back to school, and just because there were so many unknowns, our superintendent and assistant superintendent, they went out to each individual school to meet with teachers to talk about what their fears were as we were trying to provide these two learning models within our district. And I do have to have some bright spots. I'm always an optimist, and so I never really want it just to be doom and gloom. I do think we've learned a lot because of COVID. I put in there the professional learning, the creativity. Our school and our community, they have all stepped up and met the challenge, and we have really made sure that we have supported teachers in ways like some of the ones I've noted today, and there have been some other creative ways. Parents supporting the school in new innovative ways. I'll be honest, Zoom meetings for parents who are working. Now they can maybe watch a Zoom meeting on their lunch break, where maybe before they couldn't get off from work to come and actually attend a meeting. So there have been some great things to come. The student engagement and innovative learning. Now, I'll be honest, we have had to track students. We are sending out text messages. We have had our social workers, as well as people from the school, to be assigned as a case manager to oversee and track and make sure that some of our kiddos were staying engaged and staying on track. I also have there the colleagues demonstrating patience and flexibility. I don't know how many times I heard we got to pivot. I've heard the uncharted waters. I mean, we've just learned so many little buzzwords because of COVID. True gratitude, everyone working together and just trying to make sure that we are providing normalcy and calm for our students, and then the endless attempts to create a positive school memories. Because the thing we have to remember, in our district, we chose to come back there were some limitations, but we still want to make sure that we're creating those memories with our students and our families. I won't say anything else about all that I've learned because I've really learned a lot. Again, better together. And I've just reminded myself of this as well as teachers and leaders when I've gone out in schools, that even on our worst day, we are a child's best hope. So we have to leave everything else by the wayside and just remember a kid is dependent on us and we are their best hope, even if we're having a rough day.
Thank you. It's really inspirational. I mean, the way your district has addressed some of these challenges, from the logistics to basically, creating a virtual elementary school from pulling from the different areas. So I think that's there's a lot of best practices that I think we can learn from your group. So thank you. Now I'd like to pivot to Victoria. And Victoria, you are not on. So there you are. I'd like to pivot to Victoria from SIIA, and she's got a short presentation on the various different federal funding pieces. So take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Denise, I think, like you said, that we've all been just hearing a lot, and it's been a new experience for all of us. And it's been a pivot, like you said, for teachers, parents, and students, and anyone involved in learning. And at the federal level, they've been very good with just having funding to support these new challenges through 3 different COVID relief bills. So the first one was the CARES Act, and that was passed in March of last year. And the CARES Act had 2 separate funds dedicated towards K-12 education. The first one was ESSER funds, and these funds were allowed to be spent on anything that's already approved under ESSA, but it also expanded to include things just like purchasing education technology and any other new challenges that schools were facing because of the pandemic. So this is school cleaning and sanitizing. As Denise mentioned, like there were still educators still inside schools and they needed PPE, or they needed things to be able to still function and get things up and going for students learning online. And they really did have they really had a lot of discretion to kind of use funds to kind of meet the needs of whatever they were seeing as things came up. So that was under ESSER, and each state received GEAR funds, and the GEAR funds were funds given directly to the governors of the states. And under the governor's discretion, they were allowed to send more funds to areas that might need more support in education. So this was split across K-12 or higher ed, but they could send funds through that. So that was the CARES Act passed in March. And then the next slide talks about the CARES Supplemental Act, and that was passed in December of last year. So that included ESSER and GEAR funds as well. These are known as ESSER 2 and GEAR 2. So the CARES Act funds are ESSER 1 and GEAR 1, and the Supplemental Act are ESSER 2 and GEAR 2. And this was kind of an expansion of the CARES Act. So again, we're seeing ESSER funds dedicated to schools and allowing them to everything that's available under ESSA, and to, again, use these funds to mitigate the needs of sanitizing. And this is the first time we do see the funds need to be allocated towards things like learning loss and helping students in the classroom. So this is the CARES Act. The Supplemental CARES Act passed in December, and the CARES Act and the Supplemental were very much focused on meeting that immediate need. We all experienced it. We kind of all had to shift overnight. One day kids were in classrooms, teachers were in classrooms, and the next day, it's school at home in your pajamas and things like that. So this was really, instrumental in getting students the equipment and things that they needed to stay connected, because no one had really ever done the virtual learning classroom. So students needed, resources to be engaged and to be connected to teachers so that they were able to have these lessons. So these funds also included, schools were able to use this to purchase ed tech or other resources that would allow students to be connected and be able to still have class, remotely. So that was a big help to all the states. And the most recent bill that was passed was the American Rescue Plan. So that was passed this year, and that included ESSER funds as well. So that was 122.8 billion for K-12 education specifically. And in this act, there were not any GEAR funds, so the governors did not receive that money. However, there was 2.75 billion for non-public schools, especially dedicated for that. But in the American Rescue Plan, I think it was a bit more focused on the recovery aspect of it. So we do have students going back into classrooms in person learning, but now it's more so how are we going to make sure that they continue learning and that, you know, the learning that they receive supports them to make up for the lost time. So there is a lot of focus on summer enrichment in the American Rescue Plans, with the funds being given to the schools. About 25% needs to be reserved for summer enrichment. So that includes things like extended school days, extended school years, and any other program that would help support students over the summer. And the department and the administration are really interested in making sure that students have all the services that they need, because again, the past school year for anyone involved is just unlike any other thing. I think the news was saying, you know, uncharted waters and things like that. Like everyone had to go through it. So they're very focused on doing that, and a lot of it will be through best practices. So the department is they have a clearinghouse that will feature best practices that they're looking to elevate and implement across the nation to, again, help schools recover that learning time for students. But it's been great. The department is and the administration is very interested in making sure that students have all of the services they need. They're also very interested in social and emotional learning for students. A lot of these funds are able to address things like that, to address students' mental health, to address the social emotional learning needs of students. So things like counselors or any other programs, or even if schools want to partner with local external organizations to come in and help students, they have the capacity to do so, again, because it's really about supporting students and teachers and everyone involved where they need it the most. Wraparound service are also included in this American Rescue Plan. Specifically, 800 million is dedicated for students and youth experiencing homelessness. So any services that would go to serve them, those can also be used under the American Rescue Plan. And again, the first two bills were very much meeting the immediate need of schools in terms of PPE, sanitizing, getting equipment up and running, and all other resources of that. And the American Rescue Plan is very much focused on that next step. So as we transition back into the classrooms, what will students need? What will teachers need? You know, there'll be kids coming into pre-K and kindergarten who never had the chance to, you know, interact with students in a large setting. So that, again, is the social emotional need and socializing students. So all of those things are what they've been doing on the federal side to help, because again, this is a lot of money has gone into education over the past year from the federal side. So they really want states to be able to have the resources to help students, help teachers, help parents stay connected, get involved, and continue to learn. So that was just a quick overview summary of the first three past COVID relief bills. And there is a proposal that President Biden released at the end of last month, which is the American Families Plan. And this is part of the administration's overall plan to build back better. So this one, the American Families Plan, is focused, you know, on families and helping them in any ways they can. And particularly on the K-12 side, there is the proposal includes 200 billion for universal public preschool for all students across the nation under 5. So they would be able to have 2 years of, 2 years of preschool before they enter kindergarten. So that is one of the things included in the American Families Plan proposal. And then on the teacher side, there is 9 billion set aside for teacher development, because again, it's as much as supporting the teachers as it is the students. So this would help to address the national teacher shortage, to make sure there are teachers in classrooms to be able to teach students. They're also looking to diversify the workforce. So they're focusing on bringing in teachers of color, or partnering with local university and teacher programs to sort of create a pipeline to bring teachers in from their program into schools. And they are looking into teacher development in terms of mentorship and leadership opportunities, and giving teachers the opportunity to earn credentials on the job, such as teachers who are interested in bilingual education certifications, as well as special education certification. So this is, again, there's been a lot of money from the federal side given to education to help address teachers, students, and make sure that they have all the resources that they need. And this new proposal, again, just goes a bit further, and then goes a bit further in proposing universal preschool for students, and as well investing a lot in teacher development.
Excellent. So a question for you, is there an order to how the schools have to use this funding? Do they have to use the CARES funding first and then work through, or are there any stipulations there?
Yeah, so the CARES Act, those are ESSER 1 and Gear 1 funds. So those need to be used first before schools or districts can use the ESSER 2 funds that came in the supplemental bill that was passed in December. So that's the order. And then the American Rescue Plan funds are ESSER 3, and there were no Gear funds in that one, so they need to use it. They need to use it in that order. And for the CARES supplemental and American Rescue Plan, schools have until 2023 to be able to use those funds for what they need.
Okay, so a lot of those initial funds, as you had said, were for getting students back into the classroom, but we may be at a point where that's lessening. So sounds like some of those funds could even be used for curricular material, that type of thing.
Yeah, so anything that's schools or districts would need, if that's like ed tech resources, like Denise said, they had a learning management system, things that would help students and teachers to stay connected and stay engaged.
So this might be for districts who have struggled with the investment needed to create a digital infrastructure. This might be a funding path for that.
Yeah, and they're allowed to be creative. I think Denise said that, like, you're allowed to be very creative with how you use the funds in terms of meeting the needs of the students. I think it was Kentucky has a public broadcast radio, so they decided to just air K-5 information on their local PBS channel during the pandemics, and they were able to do that via the COVID relief funds. So creativity is the name of the game in terms of finding ways to meet students' needs.
Excellent. And one of the questions I just saw in the Q&A, money, can any of this money be used for teacher professional development?
Yeah, so teacher professional development in terms of if you need we're all using new resources. So if teachers need new certifications or need to learn how to do things, they're allowed to do that. Because again, anything that was allowable under ESSA before the COVID relief, they're also allowed to use that. And anything that would help to address COVID, anything that is needed to address students' needs in COVID. So teacher development definitely falls under that.
Okay, excellent. And I'd like to remind folks, if you have registered for this, there will be a recording made available, because I know Victoria's thrown a lot of numbers around. And also, Victoria's colleague, Sarah Cluck, had joined me on our Westchester Words podcast. And we can throw up a link in the chat to that as well. Thank you very much, Victoria. Kathy, I'd like to turn to you now and talk about what you're seeing in the industry as in your role with SIMBA. You have you've been reporting on the trends and movements and changes within the industry. So the big question really would be, how are companies adjusting to these pandemic changes? What sort of creative and innovative things are you seeing?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah,
Great.
your video is still for
The video is still off.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can stop that.
There we are.
There we are. Yes, obviously when this all started, there was kind of this halt to almost everything. But the companies, both digital and print publishers really got into action. The biggest disruption immediately was probably to the print publishers because they had from the warehouse on up, it was impossible to get materials that had been ordered, and this was beginning to happen right at the spring ordering season. So that kind of put a halt to things. But so initially there was this problem of getting materials to school. What happened was a lot of creativity on the part of the schools and the part of the publishers in terms of non-digital materials getting to schools. The other thing that publishers and digital providers did immediately was make things available to parents. I think initially the most important thing was all of this stuff became basically free. So it was we're not going to mess around. You guys need the stuff, we'll give it to you. The other thing that happened that I thought was interesting was they had to turn into sort of providing professional development to a new set of teachers, mom and dad, for all the stuff that was going home. And parents were getting a lot of stuff one way or another. They were either ordering it or getting it for free through the schools, however that worked. And one of the CEOs of one of the companies told me last spring that they had a history of working with non-educator providers on their materials. So they had a well-developed plan of instructing people on how to use this stuff. So that was very helpful to them when they began to get orders from parents for this thing, for these materials. Support was initially the key. In terms of publishers and digital providers working with schools. That was then. Now there is a lot of stressing, as both Denise and Victoria have mentioned, on recouping learning, and the providers of instructional materials are looking at that. There is repackaging of materials, of programs that they use for schools, combining different aspects of it for home use, because parents, whether they're doing the instruction or they were supplementing what they were getting from the schools, were very interested in getting materials on their own as well. From the publishing and digital side of things, they're not necessarily creating something new, but they're making sure that what is needed is tried and true, but put out in a different way because of the need for either hybrid or remote when it has to be. And I expect much of that to continue when schools go back, because there will be a planning for hybrid or moments or times when they have to go remote, if that's the possibility. The other thing that is happening is at the state level, there is contact between, as there always has been, but continuing with publishers and digital providers. And Connecticut just recently, which is my state, so that's sort of why I heard it first. They are working with now Apex Learning and Defined Learning are working with Connecticut on providing programs either for credit recovery or for personal interest for grades 6 through 12. And that will be free to the school districts. The students would actually access it through the school districts, but it will be free that way.
Interesting. So, yeah, and that sounds like that capitalizes a little bit on some of the things Victoria was talking about with the learning loss and summer enrichment. Right. You mentioned a lot of these companies making the materials free. there had been a lot of chatter about what they were going to do when it was time to start charging again. What are you seeing?
They are charging again. I mean, there is still some going out that is free, but that kind of changed after the immediate crisis. Certainly, we'll probably talk about it later, but in terms of adoptions, I mean, it wasn't that schools didn't have money at all. In the crisis moment, the publishing to everybody were free. And I think through the summer that continued. Agreements were probably worked out more in the fall, but the pricing did come back.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about adoptions some more. What
Okay.
well, always a favorite topic, right? So what did you see last year, and what are the coming years look like as in terms of the impact from COVID?
Actually, it was a little surprising. As an adoption year, 2020, the spring of 2020 was not, so the materials would be in schools in fall of 2020, was not going to be a big adoption year anyway. But in many ways, I was surprised when we went to pull results. A lot of school districts were proceeding with purchasing. They needed materials. They had planned for materials. The piloting, the interest in materials and looking at it had begun in the fall, if not the summer, but certainly by the fall of the previous year. So even though they were going through all of this, school boards did meet via Zoom. They did make decisions on a lot of things, including adoptions. And so in terms of that did proceed. It was not a huge adoption year, but where schools had begun the process earlier in the year, they did continue with it.
And how about into this year, into 2021?
In terms of, well, we had talked earlier, I think, about some of the disruptions, and I was thinking about that, and it always seems that in almost every couple of years, there is a disruption of one sort or another in the adoption market. A couple of years ago, Florida canceled its adoption and postponed it while they revisited some standards. Texas this year has done much the same. They postponed a widely anticipated K-12 science adoption because they wanted to review standards. And so they put out an entirely new calendar with an empty year in there. California has had protracted decision-making among the districts for several years now, and that is expected to continue a bit. They're really looking at what they need. They're not making decisions. I think some of that, with the funding that's coming in, and in so many ways, there's funding in California. I mean, the surplus they've got, budget surplus, is astounding, which is contradictory to everything that we were hearing when the pandemic hit, interestingly enough. But that has become a thing, the protracted decision-making in California, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. So for the coming year, we're looking at more science and social studies decisions in California. Florida is doing reading. Mississippi, West Virginia, Oregon, high school in New Mexico are also doing reading and English language arts. And South Carolina and Alabama are doing math, and the schools seem to be proceeding apace with that. So
safe to say the adoption process is always fraught with weird little perils. It's not any different, really.
Yes.
I mean, COVID may have been a factor, but some of the things that happened may have happened anyway, it sounds like. COVID was a factor, I think, in
actually running the schools. I think from the school board side, it might have disrupted some planning for this year. In other words, how are we going to go forward? But most of the work in a school district for making adoption decisions in the spring, in the March, April, May time frame in order to get the materials in the fall, had begun earlier because they set up review panels among teachers and they do pilot programming. So that much of that was already underway.
Okay, excellent. And we just got a question in, will South Carolina continue with the science adoption this year?
I don't know particularly because I have not talked to them. They do science materials on a kind of prorated basis every year. I mean, science is always a thing with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
At least refurbishment.
And so what, if you've got a unique vantage point in the market, if you were looking out and wanted to advise companies on how they could capitalize on the situation, in particular the federal funding, what are a couple of areas that you see companies addressing, or opportunities that you might see for them to address?
I think some of them have already been mentioned. The SEL, it doesn't matter what you are used to producing as a publisher or a digital provider, and that is an area you're going to be asked to help address. You might be providing a math program, but whether you need to create a whole new SEL, but that is an opportunity generally for, and there have been a number of acquisitions and partnerships among publishers that don't provide it with publishers that do provide SEL, because it's a need in the schools, and publishers and digital providers are nothing if not always trying to meet that need one way or another. Renaissance Learning, for instance, just recently acquired Nearpod and Lalilo, and I'm not saying they did this to address the provisions in these federal acts, but the impact of those acts feed into what they've done. And Nearpod will help Renaissance in providing a platform, self-paced learning in and out of the classroom. And Lalilo gives Renaissance early literacy in K-12, and that there is going to be, and the areas that we're seeing real emphasis on are literacy, foundational literacy, foundational math, and SEL. And there is a lot of discussion, and I'm going to jump in, and one of my predictions is it's going to be a highly charged year in terms of social studies, civics, and addressing racial issues.
Yeah. I think that's I think we're seeing that as well. So one more question that came in.
Yep.
What sort of conversations are you seeing around open educational resources and platforms that are organized for families, students, and educators?
I'm seeing more of that, but I have not seen a lot of it, but I have begun to see out of the higher ed, I see that a lot. I have begun now to see the discussion in K-12. So I think there will be more of that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we've got about 15 minutes left. What I'd like to do is invite Denise and Victoria back. And then there were a number of questions submitted online prior to the webinar. So I'd like to kind of chop through those. We may not, if you submitted a question, we may not get to all of them. We'll do our best to answer all of them that we can, though. So first question is for Denise. How are you dealing with the sense of community among students? Is it a pressing issue at the district level that needs to be solved?
I think it is a pressing issue that needs to be solved. We have used castles to help us to understand how important it is to attend to the social and emotional needs that will arise during this time. We basically, from a district, we have worked with our schools, and with castles, we are looking at basically about 4 general concepts. First, with creating the foundation for the social emotional learning, providing the support and mutual respect for staff members, because again, the focus on staff members was critical as well. then providing that platform for students, and then seeing what we've learned and making adjustments based upon what we've learned.
Okay, excellent. And then this would be, I think, Denise, you first, but Kathy or Victoria, if you want to weigh in on this as well. Can you comment on the quality and access of distance learning for English language learners relative to the general population?
With our English language learners, what we had to do was, I kind of say, almost double services, especially for our kids who chose the distance option. They have a homeroom teacher who is providing instruction. We have also paired them with a in-school teacher who, after hours, we pay a stipend and they provide support as well if they have the time during that day. They have also jumped on to Zoom lessons where there's been some collaborative teaching with the homeroom teacher and the EL teacher. I mean, we've been very creative with, we've had to bring kids in to actually give them various assessments because we still gave the access test to our EL learners. We had to provide the opportunity for MAP testing because MAP is the benchmark assessment that we use in our district. We have one person in our district that is dedicated as the director for EL services, and she's done a phenomenal job with making sure we have provided the resources for those students during this time and during our distance learning time.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and I should note, there's also, and Nicole can probably throw this up in the chat or we can follow up with this, but Westchester did a webinar about a year ago on resources for EL, and it talks about some of the kinds of things that you've addressed. So that might be of interest to the folks who've asked that question. I think that we've touched on this a little bit, but let's hit it directly. What sort of impact do any of you think we'll see with hybrid learning after the pandemic? I mean, we're still, probably a year away from, from complete normalcy, but after that, take me to 2025. What does hybrid learning look like there? What place does it have in the districts?
I think you'll see some movement towards it. Our district makes up our Northeast Georgia region. There are about 13 school districts, and we shared a document with leaders asking, like, what are you offering kids for the upcoming school year, K-5, what does middle school look like, as well as high school? And then we asked, a couple of years from now, what are your plans? What are your thoughts? A lot of people, I'll be honest, in our area, there are very little opportunities as far as a distance learning model for the elementary schools. But I'll be honest, I think some people are, I guess, a little leery because you have screen time, and the amount of screen time that kids are, that they are provided or whatever during the course of the school day. We've also talked about the science of teaching reading and how that's difficult if you're not very creative, but still you have some limitations also with that pre-K through second grade as far as teaching reading. And then you have those socialization issues too, because you want kids to learn how to get along, how to play, how to interact well with other students. So in our area, we really did not see a lot of districts next year who will provide a distance learning opportunity. But I'll be honest, there were maybe about 3 out of the 13 districts that are going to provide a distance learning academy where they're going to do some PBL and some personalized learning opportunities for students. It's very interesting, and I'm very interested to hear what their plans are, because there was not a district out of the 13 that were saying, 2 years out, yes, we know that we've been successful at providing a digital learning platform for students and parents, and we want to make sure we're creative in being able to provide for those needs. We have some special ed parents, and they email on a regular basis, like, my kid has ABA therapy, and I haven't had to check them out of school for those therapy sessions because of distance learning. And so they have tried to be a proponent for why we should look at a model next year for elementary. And certainly we'll take all of those things into consideration. And that's the good part about, you know, making sure you want to be, I guess, you want to be in tune with the needs of the community that you serve. And our parents have been great about completing surveys. And when we've had our community meetings where we've had like town hall meetings, we have had lots of attendance because parents do want to make sure that their voices are heard during this time. So I think you'll see a shift. Like I said, next year for us, elementary, it's 3 out of 13 districts. All 13 are providing an option for middle school next year, as well as high school. But within the years to come, everybody was saying they know they would make some type of transition with looking at how to do, whether it's hybrid or just a full distance learning model for a population of students that is the need for that population.
And
Yeah, I agree with Denise. I think it'll be very much up to the districts in terms of, like you said, meeting the needs of the students. So I think schools and districts will have the opportunity to assess what worked for them, because in some cases the distance learning provides, like Denise said, opportunities for students to be more flexible or meet their needs in different ways. So I think we'll see a lot of incorporation and a lot of student districts assessing what worked and what didn't work. In conjunction with like the best practices clearinghouse the department is looking to work on, I think we'll see a lot of hybrid models could be incorporated just long term as an alternative or something available to students who might need that, or it might serve them better.
And thank you. And I think I heard you say earlier that a lot of the funding would certainly allow for building that infrastructure for distance learning for schools that who were struggling with that in the past. Is that right?
Yeah, so schools will be able to do that, and I know that schools can also talk to the providers or the resources that they're using. I know a lot of our members, they haven't been able to sit down and kind of talk with schools about what worked and what didn't work just because of the restrictions. But I think once they're able to do that, they can kind of work together and they can kind of communicate what did work or what they're looking for. And I think that can help kind of just bolster the distance learning resources that schools and districts have available and that students will have access to.
Excellent. Yeah. And Kathy, are you seeing anything in the adoption language that's requiring, hybrid learning possibilities?
Not in the adoption language. I mean, there might be, but I have not seen any. It's like, but adoption's opened up to digital materials a long time ago. So that has been a possibility.
Okay.
I have, I would just one comment on the hybrid distance. My experience with hybrid was half the class being home, half the class being in school, and the teacher talking to all of them on a computer and in the classroom at the same time. I see that was really tough on the teacher. And it was, so I've seen a lot of districts beginning to offer and consider offering a distance learning option. In other words, instead of being in class, you would take 5th grade out of class if you wanted to at home. But that hybrid model where the teacher in the classroom has to teach both the kids, and half the kids would be in there half the week and the other half in there the other half of the week. That was a really tough period the kids went through with that one.
Yeah. Some of my kids actually went through that at the beginning of this school year, and it was tough. It was tough as a parent to keep up. I'm sure it was tough for the teachers to figure out.
Oh yeah. Okay,
now what, with this group I've already introduced the concept. With this group I haven't. How do I, keep them working at the same level? So I think.
Well, the kids that are at home were on the computer, so the teacher was standing there talking to the kids in the class and the kids on the computer at the same time, and that was like.
Yeah, and I thought I heard Denise, that was pretty interesting what you were talking about, that your district essentially created a virtual school, pulling resources from individual schools to create something that wasn't an out of the, it wasn't an off the shelf distance learning program, but was rather something with your own teachers, but so they would, have the familiarity with the students and provide that comfort level, but give them something that was equal to. And I think that's really innovative. That's the first that I've heard of folks doing that. Most of what I saw before, more like what Kathy had described.
And that also came as a result of surveying teachers, and Kathy is correct. I mean, overwhelmingly, I cannot remember the percentage, but I think it was in the 90s where teachers were saying, like, I don't know how I would physically be able to do both successfully. And so then as a district, and I will say it was almost like a crisis for June and July. So we're like, okay, so what's our plan B? And now we know in curriculum, and my boss is very funny because when he hired me, he said, Denise, there are no emergencies in curriculum. And I'm like, okay, this is the true emergency of curriculum. But it was great to see our entire team work together. We created that elementary school, we created the distance learning middle school, and we created the distance learning high school. But the thing about it is we kept them in their base schools too. So like if the principal sent out a correspondence for pictures, we still wanted distance learning kids to have that option. So if you want to come in and take your pictures, fine. We just had field day. Invitations went to my distance learning kids so they could come and participate in field day if that was what they needed to do or wanted to do. So we still kept them in communication with their base school. And I feel like that was the key for us that was very successful too. I mean, yes, I served as the principal. They received information from me, but anything that came from their base school that was happening, we wanted them still to feel a part of their school community because we didn't know if we were going to continue with this model, or we decided for elementary, they will go back to their base schools, but that was very key for us.
Excellent, excellent. So we only have about a minute or two left. There are a ton more questions. So what we'll do is try to follow up. I'll work with everybody here and we'll try and get answers to the questions and send them out. We do have a couple other webinars coming up, so watch our site. Some of those might be better addressed for later webinars. I want to leave this with just one last thought from each of you. And Kathy, I'll start with you because you put your hand a little bit on this. Predictions that you might see when kids return to the fall. What do you think it might look like?
Well, I think we've talked a lot about it. I think there will be, it seems to be schools are reopening. There will be a distance option in many cases, and that will probably become a permanent thing. I think it's going to, it came out of an emergency, but there are so many kids that have thrived in that environment that there will be a place for it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Victoria, what about you? Prediction for next year?
I think we'll really see the dawn of a lot of creative ways to teach and engage students, just because everywhere is so different. And we've already seen different schools and districts do a lot of different things. So I think just classroom activities, the resources and ed tech they might incorporate will really differ from district to district. So learning will just look different everywhere.
Excellent. And I think, Denise, your district really exemplifies that in terms of creative thinking. So what would you say, one prediction that you expect you might see?
I would agree with Kathy and Victoria. I really do think this has tapped into a creative mode for teachers, for leaders, for parents and students as well. And I will also say, I think we've learned, again, so much from COVID. We've learned that schools are more than just a place that provides academics. I mean, it is a true place of stability for students. And I just hope with us going forward and making decisions that we remember that it's more than just test scores. You know, behind that data, there are kids and we impact their futures.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. As I said earlier, we'll try to address all the questions we can. And Nicole will follow up with an email of a recording for this. So until next time, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.